Disclaimer. This podcast talks about sensitive topics and we try to show no bias throughout the podcast. We have researched from many different sources to try to come as close to the truth as possible. Are you sure you know the full truth about 9/11? Are you certain that what you were told was what actually happened? Or is everything a lie? Was everyone lied to just to turn their attention away from the greater disaster? On September 11, 2001, 4 planes were hijacked in a suicide terrorist attack against New York, led by the Islamic people. Those who claimed responsibility were Osama bin Laden leading Al-Qaeda. 2 planes hit the Twin Towers, 1 plane on each, while another struck the Pentagon, and the 4th was aiming for the White House but was counter-hijacked by the passengers and thrown to the ground, killing everyone on board. But this wasn't the first attack on the Twin Towers. 8 years earlier, Arab Islamist terrorists detonated a car bomb near the North Tower in hopes of making it collapse on its twin. It was unsuccessful, but not without killing 6 people and injuring over 1,000 others.
The first tower was struck at 8:46 a.m. American Airlines Flight 11 took off at 7:59 a.m., headed to Los Angeles from Boston. Not more than 15 minutes into the flight, the hijackers stormed into the cockpit, injuring 2 people and murdering 1. When the cockpit was taken care of, they stormed into the passenger area of the plane and forced everyone to sit in the very back of the plane, against everyone's will. At 8:46 a.m., they crashed into the 93rd floor of the North Tower. At 8:14 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 departed from Logan Airport at Boston, New York, and was also heading to Los Angeles. 28 minutes into the flight, the hijackers injured several crew members and murdered the 2 pilots. They then turned the plane around and struck the southern tower at 9:03 a.m. At 8:20 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 took off from the Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C., and within 30 minutes, the hijackers had cleared the cockpit and forced everyone else on board to the back of the plane. The lead hijacker, who went by Hanyor, took control of the plane and pushed it towards the Pentagon, hitting it at 9:37 a.m. It caused partial destruction as the plane hit the ground before hitting the building. The destruction can still be sighted today, although it is repaired. The paint color is different from the original color. At 10:03, the 4th and final hijacked plane, heading towards the Capitol, crashed in an open field in the Somerset County, Pennsylvania. In total, 5 skyscrapers collapsed due to the explosion and ruptures in the earth. In Osama bin Laden's letter to America in 2002, he stated in bold detail that Al-Qaeda's motives for the attack on U.S. included the U.S. support of Israel, attacks against Muslims in Somalia, support of the Philippines against Muslims during the Moro conflict, the presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia, and the support of Russian offense against Muslims in Chechnya, a Russian republic between the Caspian Sea and Black Sea. After the attacks, bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri released a video and audio tapes they had recorded, which stated the same reasons for the attack. The 2 most important documents were stated to be the 2002 letter to America and the 2004 videotape of bin Laden.
After the attacks on September 11, aviation was changed entirely. Taking place on November 19, 2001, George Bush signed the Aviation and Transportation Security Act. This allowed pilots to arm themselves with self-defense weapons and also made it mandatory to be screened when going through airport checks ins and out. This started a new era of post-9/11 air travel. In later dates, it's also included the addition of machines to screen baggage, as well as adding full-body scanners to check for bombs and other terrorist instruments. In 2016, airport security started implementing the shoes-off rule for additional checking of bombs or other threats. Following the attacks, the government responded immediately by commencing rescue operations at the World Trade Center. They also began a long-term response with military action. The government put up a search and rescue operation right after the attacks to see if they could find any survivors. Because Al-Qaeda was centered in Afghanistan, the U.S. began planning an invasion of Afghanistan. Fearing retaliation by the U.S. military, many Afghan people fled from Afghanistan into the neighboring nation, Pakistan. Pakistan was already full of Afghan refugees from the recent humanitarian crisis in the decades before. Pakistan closed its borders on Afghanistan on September 17, 2001, 7 days after the Twin Towers fell. Some people fled into the mountains between Afghanistan and other neighboring nations, Tajikistan, but they were denied entry. Many Afghans fled to Iran since the Iranian government didn't close their borders to Afghanistan, at least not at first. The national leaders of Afghanistan, the Taliban, negotiated with the U.S. not to invade Afghanistan, stating that their people were already suffering enough from the recent humanitarian crisis there. Almost a month after the attacks, the U.S. led a coalition of armed forces from NATO into Afghanistan to start 2 long decades of conflict there. Recently, into 2020, the U.S. withdrew all armed forces from Afghanistan after failing to establish a secure democracy, leaving Afghanistan under Taliban rule. In the war, around 12,000 Afghans died, 2,000 of them civilians. While the U.S. casualties are unknown, they're estimated to be around 7,000.
In 2003, George W. Bush, the president of the USA at the time, organized a special military operation in the Middle Eastern country, Iraq. The USA, along with the UK and Poland, led the military operation into what they called a member of the Axis of Evil. The war was also a consequence of the terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers 2 years earlier. The leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, was thought to be friendly with Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group led by Osama bin Laden. The US and other UN members thought that Iraq and Saddam Hussein were harboring several Al-Qaeda members, including Osama bin Laden. On March 20, 2003, the US led the military into the nation's capital, Baghdad. The war had begun. The US had given Saddam Hussein and his 2 sons a 48-hour surrender period, which Hussein promptly ignored. The US then bombed and neutralized major cities in Iraq like Baghdad, Mosul, and Barash, resulting in many civilian casualties. The U.S. withdrew all forces in Iraq on December 18, 2011, after a grueling 8 years of fighting. According to the WikiLeaks of classified Iraq war logs, almost 300,000 civilians died in the Iraq War, while only around 300 fighters from NATO coalition led by the U.S. died. The captured Al-Qaeda members were brought back to the U.S. for trial, including Saddam Hussein. Around 500 of them received the capital punishment. Because of the war, Iraq nowadays is a violent, divided country controlled by independent militias and renegades.
But all this could be a lie. When speaking in an interview with Tyler Oliveira on YouTube, Chris Joya states, "I'm an ex-chief in the Franklin Square and Munson Fire Department. Yes, I believe it's a false flag." A false flag is an operation that was conducted by the government to make it seem that a group or entities committed some acts which required the government to attack a country. He also states about how he believed that one of the buildings that collapsed was actually a controlled demolition. When asked by Tyler, "What made you come to the conclusion that 9/11 was a false flag?" he responded, "For the first 10 years, I did not think anything other than the original narrative, then being after shown a close-up video of the building number 7 coming down. Building 7 was a building that was the northernmost tower, not even on the World Trade Plaza. It was one of the 5 towers that collapsed during the attacks, and when Chris Joya watched the tape back, he realized that it fell from the bottom down, unlike the other towers, which fell from the top down. I've been involved with heavy construction for over 30 years. I've been involved with the construction of high-rise steel frame buildings in Manhattan. I've worked on bridges, and I know what goes into these buildings. I know what fire loads they can handle. The trade centers were unique in that they were designed to withstand the impact of a jet, from what I understand. The outer skeleton of the building, the outer columns, was like a fishnet. You had this inner core columns, which were substantially thick beams." That's what Chris claimed. After which, stating that there would be no way that any other thing than a controlled demolition would have been able to take down that tower. The way that the tower fell uniformly shows that there would have been no way that shrapnel would have been able to cause the tower to collapse. The skeleton of the building was built like a fishnet, with thick metal beams stretching about 3 floors high, with the width of the whole. It was built to withstand the impacts of huge amounts of shrapnel and fire if it were to be flying at the building. So the only likely theory is that someone or something set an explosive in the building. The theory also states that Building 7 was used as a central hub to talk about how they would initiate the quote-unquote terrorist attacks to draw the attention from the public away from the bigger things. But what were those bigger things? What sort of things would have to be covered up by something as big as 9/11, which killed around 2,977 people and injuring thousands more? Reuters fact check states that former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld did not reveal that the Pentagon had lost $2.3 trillion the day before September 11, 2001. And and that his reasonings for it was because our financial systems are decades old. According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions. We also cannot share this information from floor to floor in this building because it's stored on dozens of different technological systems that are either inaccessible or incompatible. Everyone on social media was going bonkers, sharing posts on Facebook which had the caption, "Never forget September 10, 2001. Donald Rumsfeld held a press conference to state that the Pentagon was missing more than $2.3 trillion, but the next day something happened and everyone forgot. Chris Gioia also goes on to state that Building 7, which had collapsed with the other towers, was not found in any 9/11 reports. He also says, quote, "I think Al-Qaeda is made up. When the FBI came out, I believe it was 2006, and actually said this is verifiable, I had no concrete evidence linking Osama bin Laden with 9/11. Osama bin Laden worked for the Central Intelligence Agency in Afghanistan. He helped us fight the Russians when they were in Afghanistan. He was a CIA operative. The CIA helped orchestrate 9/11. It was their plan. George Bush's father was having lunch with Osama bin Laden's brother or cousin that day, or the day before 9/11, end quote. Another big thing was that Iraq was sitting on massive oil reserves at the time, and we all know America liked that oil.
In the same video that interviewed Chris Gioia, Tyler Oliveira states that most people forget about Flight 93 that crashed in the middle of nowhere, Shanksville, Pennsylvania. At least, that's the official story. The two basic theories here on Flight 93 are either A, the passengers took control of the plane and heroically crashed it, or B, the passengers fought back, causing the hijackers to have to crash it in the forest. But if you Google it, you'll find kind of inconclusive answers. Now keep in mind, as Flight 93 is being hijacked, Dick Cheney has already sent out the order to shoot down any non-responsive, threatening-looking planes. So two F-16 fighter pilots are looking for Flight 93. 6 eyewitnesses say that they saw a white jet flying low, basically hovering above the crash site, presumably an Air Force plane that shot down Flight 93 to protect anyone in Washington. The main body of the engine was found miles away from the crash site, comparable to what you see in a heat-seeking missile due to an airliner. End of quote. Upon Googling Flight 93, the following story came up. United Airlines Flight 93 was a domestic scheduled passenger flight that was hijacked by 4 Al-Qaeda terrorists in the morning of September 11, 2001. As part of the September 11 attacks, the hijackers intended to crash into a federal government building in Washington, D.C. The operation partially failed when the passengers fought back, forcing the terrorists to crash the plane in a Pennsylvania field, thwarting their main objective but killing everyone aboard the flight. The airliner involved a Boeing 757-222 with 44 passengers and crew, was flying United Airlines' daily scheduled morning flight from Newark International Airport in New Jersey to San Francisco International Airport in California, making it the only plane hijacked that day that does not be a Los Angeles-bound flight. In 2006, Robert Burt made an article on robertburt.com, which used an article written by Frank Circle, which states at the start, there are several puzzling facts in the film United 93 that does not even attempt to address. The first is that the fact that Flight 93 left a debris trail extending over 8 miles long. This is not consistent with the plane brought down by passengers within, but is consistent with the plane that was shot down. It later states that, what do I take all of this to mean? I think that the best explanation of these facts is that a military jet, probably an F-16 Interceptor, tailed Flight 93 that day and shot it down before it could reach its intended destination.
So after stating all of this information, what can we actually pull from this? Well, in the words of Chris Gioia, 9/11 was a false flag, an operation made by the government in 2001 to draw attention away from the mass military and operational spending, as Iraq and Northern Africa at the time were sitting on massive oil reserves which America had wanted, as their economy would be driven up with billions of dollars they could gain from the reserves. But was this really true? In 2019, the UIF, University of Alaska Fairbanks, came out with a report that backed up Gioia's statements on 7 WTC being a controlled demolition, stating that the Franklin Square and Munson Fire District, which oversees a district of 30,000 residents outside of Queens, passed a resolution on July 24 claiming that there is overwhelming evidence that pre-planted explosives caused the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center buildings. They had spent 4 years in deep studying to see what they could actually taken 7 WTC down, as many had speculated that the office fires could not have actually taken 7 WTC to the floor, especially not the way that it uniformly fell to the floor from the bottom down. But that just explains 3 of the 5 buildings that collapsed, but not the other 2. Those other 2 being the actual Twin Towers, 1 WTC and 2 WTC. The others could have probably exploded with the others after a true terrorist attack, right? Maybe the explosives were planted in the buildings and the government was just waiting for the right time to explode them. And then on 9/11, there was a terrorist attack, and so they initiated the explosives and got rid of 3 more towers.
As stated very, very briefly earlier in the podcast, 8 years earlier, there was a bombing called the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which was led by a group of several Arab Islamist terrorists, including Ramzi Youssef, who later joined Al-Qaeda and helped with the attacks of 9/11. Before the initial bombing, Ramzi did train at an Al-Qaeda training camp in Afghanistan before plotting the attacks in 1991. In 1992, he illegally entered the USA with a fellow terrorist, Ahmad Ajiaj, from Pakistan, who was later arrested for trying to enter the USA with a forged Swedish passport, and was found to have bomb-making instructions in his luggage. Youssef set up his residency in New Jersey with an Iraqi passport and started creating the 1,500-plus-pound car bomb out of urea nitrate hydrogen. After creating and failure to set off the car bomb, he stated in his trial that he had hoped that the bomb would have created a big enough explosion to make 1 WTC, the Northern Tower, topple over 2 WCC, and kill at least 250,000 people in order to get revenge on the US for supporting Israel in the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And in the year 2000, Al-Qaeda had planned to bomb 4 more locations: a fully booked Radisson hotel in Amman, Jordan, the border between Jordan and Israel, Mount Nebo, a Christian holy site, and a site on the Jordan River where John the Baptist is said to have baptized Jesus. These sites were chosen as they would have the most American tourists looking at them. There was also a planned bombing of Los Angeles International Airport where Ahmad Ressam, an Algerian citizen living in Montreal, Canada, confessed after interrogation to have planned the bombing. The operation was named Border Bomb. And there were also plans to explode Long Beach Airport, Ontario Airport, and the Seattle Space Needle. On December 30th, 1999, an Indian flight that was heading to Nepal was hijacked by Al-Qaeda in hopes of exploding at midnight on December 31st, 1999, where the hijackers had told the pilot to, quote, "Fly slowly and calmly. We need to give India a millennium gift." The plane was eventually landed in Taliban-ruled Afghanistan, with India releasing 3 captives in hope of letting the 200-plus passengers on the flight live. Another big thing to note was that in 1950, Sayyid Qutb had returned to Egypt after a 2-year adventure in the United States, and then had joined the Muslim Brotherhood due to his disgust for the United States. 2 things are notable here. A, the Muslim Brotherhood is speculated to be what formed Al-Qaeda, and B, the Muslim Brotherhood had stated that another outlined a strategy for the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States that involved eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within. The Muslim Brotherhood caused several assassinations, murders, and terrorist attacks, and they were set up in Egypt originally. But the funny thing here is that they are on a list called Designated Terrorist Groups. And the following countries designate the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist: Bahrain, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Syria, the United Arab Emirates, and, well, Egypt themselves. But where are we headed with this? Why do we need to know about the Muslim Brotherhood, which was formed in 1950, if we're talking about 9/11, which happened more than 50 years later? As we had stated, the Muslim Brotherhood is what most likely had Al-Qaeda formed, probably around 1988, and before then had already stated that they wanted to destroy America. So the Brotherhood, which led to the creation of, and majorly influenced Al-Qaeda, was seeking to destroy the USA since 1950. When was George W. Bush born? 1946. So since George Bush was 4, there have been groups of terrorists seeking to terrorize and destroy the USA.
Does this mean that the government has absolutely nothing to do with 9/11? We don't know, and we probably won't ever until we see a sudden breakthrough in research done. Though, is which we are seeing more and more. Just like with the UAF research of 7 WTC being bombed and not coming down with fires, as well as the 2 other buildings that were supposedly collapsing from fires.
So, in conclusion, we can know that 9/11 is still a massive mystery, and there are many theories surrounding what actually caused it. Much more research may have to be done, and to figure out the truth, we may need to look to broader resources and many things that seem to have no link to the initial attack. Thank you for listening to our podcast today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.